Got a puzzle in my head spinning round, questions stacking high like bricks on the ground. Truth and reason play a game, they twist and turn. In the fire of the mind, the answers burn. Logic rising like the sun in the sky. Quest of confusion, break as we fly. Feel the rhythm of the mind, don't deny. Introductory logic, let your thoughts amplify. Premises falling like rain from the clouds. Arguments dancing in the thinking crowds. If this is true, and that is too, what's the conclusion? We'll break it through. Logic rising like the sun in the sky. Quest of confusion, break as we fly. Feel the rhythm of the mind, don't deny. Introductory logic, let your thoughts amplify. Plenum of reason, we find our way, guided by the light of a brighter day. If A is to B and B is to C, then the answer is clear, it's plain to see. Logic rising like the sun in the sky. Quest of confusion, break as we fly. Feel the rhythm of the mind, don't deny. Introductory logic, let your thoughts amplify. In the rhythm of the mind, don't deny. Introductory logic, let your thoughts amplify. In the rhythm of reason, we find our way, guided by the light of a brighter day. If A is to B and B is to C, then the answer is clear, it's plain to see. Logic rising like the sun in the sky. Quest of confusion, break as we fly. Feel the rhythm of the mind, don't deny. Introductory logic, let your thoughts amplify.
An introductory logic course typically covers the fundamental principles of correct reasoning, equipping students with the tools to analyze arguments and construct sound inferences. It often begins with propositional logic, exploring the truth-functional relationships between statements using symbols and truth tables. Students then progress to predicate logic, which delves into the internal structure of propositions and the quantification of variables. Key topics include identifying valid and invalid argument forms, understanding logical connectives, translating ordinary language into symbolic notation, and grasping concepts like consistency, tautology, contradiction, and logical equivalence. The course aims to develop critical thinking skills, enhance analytical abilities, and provide a foundation for further study in philosophy, mathematics, computer science, and other fields that rely on rigorous argumentation. Logic, at its core, is the systematic study of correct reasoning. It investigates the principles and criteria that allow us to distinguish good arguments from bad ones, and to determine when a conclusion genuinely follows from a set of premises. This involves analyzing the structure of arguments, identifying logical truths, and understanding how propositions relate to one another through concepts like implication, consistency, and contradiction. While often formalized with symbolic languages in fields like mathematics and computer science, formal logic also extends to the analysis of everyday reasoning and arguments expressed in natural language. Informal logic, aiming to enhance critical thinking and the ability to evaluate information rigorously. You can prove anything you want by coldly logical reason if you pick the proper postulates. We have ours and Qt robot Qt1 has his. Then let us get at those postulates in a hurry. The storm s due tomorrow. Powell sighed wearily. That's where everything falls down. Postulates are based on assumptions and adhered to by faith. Nothing in the universe can shake them. Isaac Asimov, Reason, Astounding Science Fiction, April 1941, p. 43. Collected in I, Robot 1950. Case studies. While logic courses equip students with the tools for rigorous argumentation and analysis, the real-world application of these principles often encounters complexities not always evident in theoretical frameworks. As Isaac Asimov's character aptly notes, postulates are based on assumptions and adhered to by faith. Nothing in the universe can shake them. This highlights a crucial point. Even the most robust logical systems are built upon foundational premises, or postulates, which themselves may not be subject to logical proof. Understanding logic, therefore, extends beyond mastering argument forms to critically examining the underlying assumptions that shape our reasoning and the conclusions we draw. The rigorous study of logic, from propositional to predicate forms, aims to establish sound methods of inference. Yet, as the exchange from Asimov's Reason suggests, the very foundations of logical systems, the postulates, can be rooted in assumptions, rather than purely demonstrable truths. This raises profound philosophical questions about the nature of knowledge and the limits of purely deductive reasoning. It underscores that while logic provides the framework for constructing valid arguments, the ultimate truth or acceptance of a conclusion often depends on the initial premises, which might be chosen based on intuition, experience, or even faith, as the character observes. An introductory logic course provides the essential framework for understanding valid reasoning, from truth tables to quantifiers. However, applying these principles in complex situations often reveals that pure logic alone may not suffice. As seen in Asimov's Reason, where characters grapple with differing postulates, the effectiveness of logical deduction is inherently tied to the assumptions upon which it's built. This reinforces that critical thinking extends beyond merely identifying valid argument forms. It also involves the crucial skill of discerning, questioning, and evaluating the underlying premises that inform any logical argument, particularly when those premises are not universally accepted. While often used interchangeably, rationality and logic represent distinct yet interconnected aspects of sound reasoning. Logic, in its more formal sense, provides the rigorous rules and structures for constructing valid arguments and identifying consistent relationships between statements. It focuses on the form of an argument, ensuring that if the premises are true, the conclusion must also be true, regardless of the actual content. Rationality, on the other hand, encompasses a broader scope, applying logic and reason to real-world situations to make informed decisions, achieve goals, and form justifiable beliefs. A rational individual not only employs logical principles but also considers available evidence, context, personal values, and potential biases to arrive at conclusions that are sensible, effective, and grounded in reality. Thus, logic serves as a fundamental tool within the larger framework of rationality, guiding the process of reasoning towards well-founded and justifiable outcomes. Syllabus: this course provides a foundational understanding of logic and its role in rationality. Students will learn the fundamental principles of correct reasoning, equipping them to analyze arguments and construct sound inferences. We'll explore both formal logic, e.g., propositional and predicate logic, and its application to everyday reasoning. The course also examines the philosophical underpinnings of logical systems, including the impact of assumptions and postulates on conclusions. The aim is to develop critical thinking, enhance analytical abilities, and foster a deeper understanding of how logic informs rational thought and decision-making. Key topics: propositional logic, truth tables, logical connectives, tautologies, contradictions, consistency, logical equivalence. Predicate logic, quantification, internal structure of propositions, translating ordinary language into symbolic notation. Argument analysis, identifying valid and invalid argument forms. Foundations of logic, the role of assumptions and postulates in logical systems. Logic versus rationality, distinguishing between formal logical validity and real-world rational decision-making. Assessment, final exam. Utility and necessity of logic. It would be a mistake to imagine that, above and beyond what is called the natural logic of sound common sense, the study of the science of logic is absolutely necessary for right reasoning. Men reasoned rightly before Aristotle ever formulated a canon of logic. It was, in fact, by an analysis of such reasonings that he discovered those canons. They could never have been discovered otherwise. Here as elsewhere, the art came before the science, theory followed practice. A man may reason rightly without knowing a single rule of the syllogism, or, conversely, he may know all the details of logic and be an indifferent guide to truth, just as a first-rate geometrician may be a failure as an engineer. But still, just as his knowledge of geometry will enable the geometrician to detect the defects in a piece of engineering, so too will an explicit knowledge of the canons of reasoning enable us to discover more readily where the fallacy of a misleading argument lies. Without professing to guard us infallibly from error, logic familiarizes us with the rules and canons to which right reasoning processes must conform, and with the hidden fallacies and pitfalls to which such processes are commonly exposed. Peter Coffey, 1912. The Science of Logic. Longmans, Green, and Company. p. 38. The origins of logic as a systematic discipline can be traced back to several ancient civilizations, though the most significant and formalized developments that laid the foundation for Western logic emerged in ancient Greece, primarily with Aristotle. While earlier cultures, including those in China and India, developed their own sophisticated systems of reasoning and argumentation, their direct influence on the Western tradition of logic is less pronounced. Here's a breakdown of the origins: ancient Greece 5th to 4th century BCE onwards, pre-Aristotelian roots. Interest in methods of inference and the analysis of arguments can be seen in earlier Greek thinkers. Philosophers like Parmenides 5th century BCE used extended arguments for their views, and his student Zeno of Elea developed paradoxes that employed reductio ad absurdum, proof by contradiction. The Sophists also contributed by focusing on rhetoric and the art of persuasion, pushing for arguments to be justified by reasons. Plato further explored the structure of statements and dialectical reasoning. Aristotle 4th century BCE, the father of logic, Aristotle is widely credited with establishing logic as a distinct and systematic field of study. His collection of works on logic, known as the organon tool, includes categories, discusses how terms relate to different categories of being. On interpretation, examines propositions, truth, negation, and different types of sentences. Prior analytics, this is his most significant contribution to formal logic, where he developed syllogistic logic. Aristotle was the first to systematically analyze valid argument forms like the famous "all men are mortal," Socrates is a man, therefore, Socrates is mortal, using variables to represent terms and demonstrating how the validity of an argument depends on its structure rather than its specific content. He also formulated the law of non-contradiction and the principle of the excluded middle. Posterior analytics deals with the nature of scientific demonstration and knowledge. Topics: focuses on dialectical reasoning and techniques for constructing arguments in debates. Point 10. On sophistical refutations, analyzes logical fallacies. Hellenistic period after Aristotle, the Stoics, particularly Chrysippus in the 3rd century BCE, developing independently of Aristotle's work, made significant advancements in propositional logic. They focused on the truth-functional relationships between entire propositions using connectives like if, then, and or, laying groundwork for modern propositional calculus. Ancient India 5th century BCE onwards, Indian logic traditions, such as the Nyaya school, also developed sophisticated systems of inference. The Nyaya Sutras around 2nd century CE presented a rigid 5-member schema for inference, including a premise, reason, example, application, and conclusion. Buddhist logicians like Dignaga and Dharmakirti 5th to 7th centuries CE further refined Indian logic, exploring concepts like necessary logical entailment. Ancient China 5th to 3rd century BCE, the Mahist school and its later offshoots, sometimes referred to as the logicians, investigated concepts related to valid inference and correct conclusions. However, this line of inquiry largely disappeared in China due to political changes. In summary, while reasoning is an inherent human capacity and various cultures developed their own forms of sophisticated thought, the systematic, formal study of logic, particularly the use of variables and the analysis of argument forms independent of their content, is largely attributed to Aristotle in ancient Greece. His work profoundly influenced the trajectory of Western logic for over 2 millennia, later being complemented by the propositional logic of the Stoics and, much later, by the algebraic and symbolic logic of the modern era. Case Study 1, The Automated Aid Dilemma. Scenario: an AI, programmed for maximum efficiency, routes humanitarian aid based purely on speed, inadvertently prioritizing less urgent areas due to its core postulate that efficiency always wins. This demonstrates how a logically sound system, built on a narrow assumption, can lead to irrational or undesirable real-world outcomes. Discussion: how does the AI's logic clash with human rationality when do postulates limit effective solutions? Case Study 2, The Ideological Echo Chamber. Scenario: an online community consistently uses shared, unexamined truths as their postulates to logically support their ideology. This creates an internally consistent but externally narrow view, hindering rational evaluation of contradictory evidence. Discussion: how do unexamined postulates create intellectual blind spots? How can we break free from such logical but irrational circles? Case Study 3, The Imperfect Climate Model. Scenario: a climate model, logically derived from established physical laws postulates, makes accurate predictions but occasionally errs due to unforeseen environmental complexities. This highlights that even rigorous logical systems are limited by the completeness of their foundational assumptions. Discussion: when is a logically sound model not perfectly rational? How do postulates evolve in scientific understanding? Imagine you're searching for a specific word in an enormous, alphabetized dictionary. You don't start at the very beginning and read every single word until you find what you're looking for. That would take an incredibly long time. Instead, you probably open the dictionary somewhere in the middle. You glance at the words on those pages. Are the words you're looking for located before or after the words you see? Based on that quick check, you then disregard half of the dictionary entirely. You're left with just half of the original problem. You repeat this process. You take the remaining section, open it roughly in the middle again, and once more, eliminate half of what's left. You keep doing this, continually cutting the search space in half with each step. Eventually, after a series of these halving actions, you're left with just a small handful of pages, then perhaps just one page, and finally, the very word you were seeking. The logarithmic way of thinking captures this idea of repeatedly dividing the problem in half until you reach the solution. It's about how many times you can perform this division until you're left with something incredibly small, even when you start with something truly massive. Case studies: finding a word in a physical dictionary. You don't scan every word. You open to the middle, check the word, and then instantly know to search either the first half or the second half. You repeat this, effectively having the number of pages you need to consider each time until you pinpoint the word. Higher-lower guessing game: when someone thinks of a number within a vast range, your most efficient strategy is to always guess the middle. Their higher or lower response immediately tells you which half of the remaining numbers to ignore, again, cutting the possibilities in half. Debugging code with git bisect. If you know a bug appeared somewhere between two specific versions of software, git bisect automates the process. One, it picks a version roughly in the middle, you test it, and then tell Git if it's good or bad. 2, based on your feedback, it eliminates half of the remaining suspect versions and continues until it pinpoints the exact change that introduced the bug. Searching a sorted database index. Database systems often use data structures like B trees or B+ trees, which are organized to allow for extremely fast lookups. Point 3, when you query for a specific record, the database doesn't scan every entry. Instead, it navigates through this sorted structure, effectively performing a series of choices that eliminate large sections of the data, much like the dictionary example, to quickly find the desired record. While basic logic deals with simple statements as whole, unbreakable units, predicate logic goes much deeper, exploring the very internal structure of those statements. This allows us to analyze arguments that depend on the specific properties things have, the relationships between different things, and how many of those things we're talking about. Think of it this way: instead of just saying it is raining, predicate logic lets us pick apart phrases like Socrates is mortal. Here, is mortal describes Socrates, and predicate logic gives us a way to represent that description, or predicate, and the individual it applies to. These predicates can describe one thing, like is mortal, or relationships between two or more things, such as loves in John loves Mary. The real strength of predicate logic comes from its ability to talk about general statements using quantification. This is how we express ideas like all of something or some of something. We have a way to say for every single thing, indicating that a property applies universally. For example, we can precisely state all humans are mortal, capturing the idea that mortality is a property of every human. Conversely, we also have a way to say there exists at least one thing, allowing us to express ideas like some students are clever. This captures the notion of existence. The true complexity and power of predicate logic emerge when we learn to translate ordinary language into this symbolic notation, especially when we're dealing with ideas that involve combinations of these general statements. It takes careful thought to unpack a sentence like every student has a favorite teacher versus there is a teacher whom all students admire, as their underlying logical structures are quite different. Understanding these subtle distinctions is vital because they directly impact whether an argument built from such statements is truly sound. This advanced understanding moves beyond simple examples to tackle complex ideas with multiple individuals, relationships, and varying scopes of generality, providing a precise way to analyze statements that would be unclear in simpler logical systems. Case Study 1, the Database Query Dilemma. A large university database contains information on students, courses, and professors, including relationships like enrolls in and teaches. A university administrator needs to generate a report showing, every student who is enrolled in at least one graduate-level course has a professor who teaches at least one other student enrolled in a different graduate-level course. Task: students must translate this complex English statement into predicate logic symbolic notation, accurately capturing the quantification all students, at least one course, at least one professor, at least one other student, a different course and the internal relationships. Challenge: the nuances of nested quantifiers and ensuring correct variable binding. Assessment focus: the ability to precisely represent complex natural language statements using the tools of predicate logic, demonstrating an understanding of scope and variable relationships. Case Study 2, Proving Software Bug Absence. A software development team asserts, for every module in the system, if that module processes user input, then it has been thoroughly tested for security vulnerabilities. Furthermore, there exists at least one module that processes user input. They want to logically prove the conclusion, therefore, there exists at least one module that has been thoroughly tested for security vulnerabilities. Task: students are given the two premises in predicate logic form and must construct a formal deduction proof using standard rules of inference, e.g. universal instantiation, existential generalization, modus ponens, to derive the conclusion. Challenge: systematically applying rules to show the conclusion necessarily follows, step by step. Assessment focus: demonstrating proficiency in constructing formal proofs in predicate logic, understanding the mechanics of argument validity beyond simple recognition. Case Study 3, the Ambiguous Legal Statute. A new legal statute states, a person is liable for damages if and only if they intentionally cause harm, or they cause harm through gross negligence, and the harm is not purely accidental. A legal team then argues, if someone caused harm that was purely accidental, then they are not liable for damages. Task: students must translate both the statute and the legal team's argument into predicate logic, paying close attention to the scope of not purely accidental and the if and only if connective. Determine if the legal team's argument is valid using either a formal proof or by constructing a counterexample, a scenario where the statute is true but the legal team's conclusion is false. Challenge: unpacking the logical structure of if and only if and the negation of complex conditions, then proving validity or constructing a counterexample. Assessment focus: applying predicate logic to analyze complex conditional statements, rigorously determining argument validity, and constructing models to demonstrate invalidity when applicable. Argument analysis, at a more advanced level, goes far beyond simply recognizing common valid patterns. It's about developing sophisticated methods to definitively prove why a conclusion must follow from its premises, or conversely, how it's entirely possible for the premises to be true while the conclusion is false. It's about moving from intuition to undeniable demonstration. To show an argument is valid, advanced logic uses formal proof systems. These systems provide a set of accepted rules of inference, basic, undeniable logical steps that allow us to move from one statement to another, like knowing that if you have if A then B and you also have A, you can logically conclude B. They also include rules of replacement, which are logical equivalences that allow us to substitute one phrase for another without changing the argument's underlying meaning. Students learn to construct deductions or derivations, which are meticulous, step-by-step sequences of these logically sound inferences. You start with the given premises and, by applying these rules, aim to reach the conclusion. If you can successfully build this chain of reasoning, the argument is proven valid. This isn't just about spotting a pattern, it's about actively constructing the logical pathway that guarantees the conclusion. When dealing with predicate logic, these proofs become even more intricate, requiring additional rules for how we handle those all and some statements. Conversely, showing an argument is invalid requires a different approach, demonstrating that the conclusion isn't guaranteed. The main way to do this in advanced logic is by constructing a counterexample. For simpler arguments, this might involve showing a situation where all the starting points are true but the ending conclusion is false. For more complex arguments, especially those involving predicate logic, this means building a hypothetical scenario or model. In this model, you define a world and assign specific properties to the individuals in that world in such a way that all of your argument's starting premises are true, but surprisingly, the conclusion turns out to be false within that very same world. For instance, to show that all birds can fly, Tweety is a bird, therefore, Tweety can fly isn't necessarily a universally valid argument if we're not careful about our definitions. One might imagine a world where birds includes penguins, who, despite being birds, can't fly. In this constructed world, the premises might be considered true, but the conclusion would be false, thus demonstrating the argument's invalidity. This skill of creating counterexamples demands not just manipulating symbols but a deep conceptual understanding of how logical forms relate to all the different possibilities in the world. Case Study 1, the Corporate Policy Mandate. Premises: all senior managers must approve budget changes. No one who approves budget changes reports directly to the CEO. Some department heads are senior managers. Conclusion: therefore, some department heads do not report directly to the CEO. Task: construct a formal deduction proof in predicate logic to demonstrate the validity of this argument, showing each step using rules of inference and quantification. Focus: proving validity through systematic, rule-based derivation. Case Study 2, the Security System Glitch. Premises: if the alarm sounds, then a breach occurred. If the cameras are offline, then a breach occurred. Conclusion: therefore, if the alarm sounds, then the cameras are offline. Task: prove the invalidity of this argument by constructing a counterexample. Describe a specific scenario, a model where both premises are true but the conclusion is false. Focus: demonstrating invalidity by showing a possible world where premises are true and conclusion is false. Case Study 3, the Research Grant Justification. Premises: every project requires significant funding. There exists at least one project that is currently in development. If a project is in development, then it is innovative. Conclusion: therefore, there exists at least one innovative project that does not require significant funding. Task: prove the invalidity of this argument by constructing a counterexample. Define a domain, e.g. Project A, Project B, and assign properties requires funding, in development, innovative, to show how the premises can hold true while the conclusion fails. Focus: constructing a predicate logic model domain, interpretations to demonstrate why the conclusion does not necessarily follow. Tolman's method offers a sophisticated way to dissect and understand the mechanics of an argument, moving beyond simply identifying a conclusion and its supporting facts. It begins with the claim, which is the central assertion or point the arguer is trying to establish. This is what they want you to believe or accept. For instance, someone might claim that electric cars are better for the environment. Now, a claim on its own isn't very convincing. It needs to be supported by grounds, which are the evidence, data, facts, or observations that directly support the claim. In our electric car example, the grounds might be electric cars produce zero tailpipe emissions and have lower life cycle carbon footprints when charged with renewable energy. These are the concrete reasons offered for why the claim should be true. However, simply stating grounds doesn't automatically make a claim valid. There needs to be a bridge, an underlying principle that connects the grounds to the claim, and that's the warrant. The warrant is the often unstated or assumed rule, principle, or generalization that justifies drawing the claim from the given grounds. For our example, the warrant might be reducing emissions and carbon footprint is beneficial for the environment. This warrant explains why zero tailpipe emissions and lower carbon footprints. The grounds lead to the conclusion that electric cars are better for the environment. The claim. While an argument might seem robust with a claim, grounds, and warrant, very few arguments are absolute. This is where the qualifier comes in. The qualifier acknowledges the degree of certainty or the limitations of the claim. It indicates the strength of the claim, using words like probably, likely, sometimes, under most circumstances, or with some exceptions. So, our electric car claim might be qualified as electric cars are generally better for the environment, or electric cars are better for the environment provided they are charged with renewable energy. Furthermore, a strong argument anticipates and addresses potential objections. The rebuttal component addresses these counterarguments or conditions under which the claim might not hold true. This demonstrates a comprehensive understanding of the issue. A rebuttal for our electric car argument could acknowledge that, however, the production of electric car batteries can be resource intensive, and their disposal presents environmental challenges. This acknowledges a valid counterpoint but doesn't necessarily invalidate the initial claim, rather it refines it. Finally, the backing provides additional support for the warrant. If the warrant itself is not universally accepted or needs further bolstering, backing offers evidence, principles, or data to make the warrant more credible. If someone challenged our warrant reducing emissions and carbon footprint is beneficial for the environment, the backing might involve citing scientific consensus on climate change and the impacts of greenhouse gases, essentially providing evidence that the warrant itself is a sound principle. This entire framework allows for a thorough and nuanced evaluation of any argument, revealing its strengths, weaknesses, and underlying assumptions. Case Study 1, a medical diagnosis. Claim: the patient likely has strep throat. Grounds: the patient has a fever, sore throat, and white spots on their tonsils. Warrant: these symptoms are commonly associated with strep throat. Qualifier: the diagnosis is likely, but not certain. Rebuttal: however, viral infections can also cause similar symptoms, and the patient doesn't have a cough, which is typical of many viral infections. Backing: medical textbooks and diagnostic criteria list these specific symptoms as strong indicators for strep throat. Case Study 2, a marketing pitch. Claim: our new smartphone will significantly increase your productivity. Grounds: it features an extended battery life, a powerful new processor, and specialized productivity apps. Warrant: longer battery life, faster processing, and tailored applications directly enable users to accomplish more tasks efficiently. Qualifier: this phone is particularly beneficial for users who frequently work on the go. Rebuttal: however, if a user primarily uses their phone for social media and casual browse, the productivity gains might be minimal. Backing: independent tech reviews consistently praise the phone's performance and app ecosystem for power users. Case Study 3, a historical interpretation. Claim: The economic policies of the 1930s significantly prolonged the Great Depression in the United States. Grounds: high tariffs restricted international trade, and government intervention in agricultural markets led to oversupply. Warrant: protectionist policies hinder economic recovery by reducing export markets and stifling market adjustments, while oversupply depresses prices and incomes. Qualifier: while not the sole cause, these policies undoubtedly exacerbated the downturn. Rebuttal: conversely, some argue that these policies provided necessary stability and relief, preventing an even deeper collapse. Backing: economic theories from the time, like those of Milton Friedman, explicitly detail how such interventions can impede market corrections and prolong recessions. Pragmadialectics views argumentation not just as a debate or a way to persuade, but as a deliberate and cooperative process designed to resolve a difference of opinion. At its core, it considers argumentation to be a rational discussion, where the primary goal is for two or more parties to arrive at a mutually acceptable conclusion regarding a disputed standpoint, purely through the exchange of reasoned arguments. It's about how people manage to move from a state of disagreement to one of agreement, or at least a clearer understanding, by adhering to specific, shared standards of reasonableness. Central to this approach is the idea that for a discussion to be truly rational and effective in resolving a dispute, participants must abide by certain procedural rules. These rules aren't arbitrary, they are derived from the very purpose of a critical discussion, to test the tenability of a standpoint. For example, one fundamental rule is that parties must not prevent each other from advancing or doubting standpoints or arguments. This means no shutting down discussion, no silencing opposing views, and no refusing to engage with challenges. Another crucial rule dictates that a party who has advanced a standpoint is obliged to defend it if asked to do so, while the other party is equally obliged to attack it if they wish to challenge it. This establishes a clear responsibility for both claiming and questioning. Furthermore, pragmadialectics emphasizes the rule that arguments must be logically valid or capable of being made valid by making implicit premises explicit. This ensures that the reasoning itself holds up to scrutiny. It also insists on relevance, meaning that arguments must pertain directly to the standpoint being discussed, avoiding irrelevant diversions or emotional appeals. Ultimately, the resolution of the dispute should come from the systematic testing of the standpoint in light of arguments and counter-arguments, leading to a conclusion that is the result of a fair and reasonable exchange, rather than force, manipulation, or rhetoric. It's a normative model for how people should argue to achieve genuine understanding and resolution. Case Study 1, a team meeting dispute. Disagreement: project lead insists we must launch this feature next week, while developer argues, it's not ready, it's too buggy. Pragmadialectical process ideal: opening stage, project lead states standpoint, developer expresses doubt. Argumentation stage, developer provides evidence of bugs and testing failures grounds. Project lead asks for specific examples or counter-arguments on why the bugs can't be fixed by next week. Testing stage, they jointly evaluate the strength of the bug reports against the pressure of the launch deadline. Concluding stage, they rationally agree the launch must be delayed, or alternatively, the developer commits to a specific fix by a revised, mutually agreed upon date. Violation common: project lead pulls rank I'm the boss, we launch. This violates the freedom rule, preventing rational discussion. Case Study 2, public policy debate. Disagreement: proponent argues, we should implement a sugar tax to reduce obesity, while opponent counters, a sugar tax unfairly burdens low-income households. One pragmadialectical process ideal: opening stage, both sides clearly state their positions. Argumentation stage, proponent presents health data, opponent presents economic impact data. Both sides challenge the relevance or sufficiency of the other's evidence. Testing stage, they examine the causal links between sugar tax and obesity reduction, and between sugar tax and disproportionate impact on low-income groups. They might seek common ground or areas of compromise. Concluding stage, they might agree that a sugar tax, if paired with other measures, could be effective, or that alternative policies are more equitable. Violation common, proponent labels opponent as anti-health or opponent accuses proponent of elitism. These are ad hominem attacks, violating the personal attack rule by shifting focus from the argument to the arguer. Case Study 3, Academic Peer Review. Disagreement, author claims, my research proves X, while reviewer responds, your methodology has flaws, therefore X is not proven. Pragmadialectical process ideal, opening stage, author submits paper implicit standpoint, reviewer raises specific methodological concerns doubt. Argumentation stage, reviewer cites specific sections of the paper and scientific principles to back their critique. Author responds by explaining their methodology or offering clarifications rebuttals to the critique. Testing stage, both sides rigorously examine the logical soundness and empirical validity of the methodology and interpretations. Concluding stage, author revises the paper to address valid criticisms, or reviewer acknowledges the author's effective defense, leading to acceptance or rejection based on the strength of the reasoned exchange. Violation common, reviewer dismisses the paper simply because it contradicts their own prior research, rather than offering specific, reasoned critiques. This violates the relevance rule and critical discussion rules. When we delve into the foundations of logic, particularly at an advanced level, it becomes crucial to acknowledge that even the most rigorous and seemingly self-evident logical systems are not built in a vacuum. Instead, they rest upon a set of fundamental, unproven starting points, assumptions and postulates. These are propositions or rules that are accepted as true or valid without requiring further proof within that specific system. They serve as the bedrock upon which all subsequent logical deductions and theorems are constructed. For instance, in classical Aristotelian logic, fundamental laws like the law of non-contradiction, a statement cannot be both true and false at the same time, and the law of the excluded middle, a statement is either true or false, function as implicit postulates. In modern formal systems, we explicitly define axioms and rules of inference that are taken for granted. The profound significance of these assumptions and postulates lies in their ultimate influence over what can be logically proven and what conclusions can be drawn within that system. Change a foundational postulate, and the entire logical landscape can shift, potentially leading to different, yet internally consistent, sets of valid inferences. This concept is vividly illustrated in various branches of mathematics, where different sets of axioms lead to distinct geometries like Euclidean versus non-Euclidean geometries or different number systems. The insight from Asimov's quote, postulates are based on assumptions and adhered to by faith. Nothing in the universe can shake them, while perhaps a slight overstatement for purely formal systems, powerfully highlights the point that these foundational elements are often chosen for their intuitive appeal, their utility, or their consistency with a particular worldview, rather than being derived from some more fundamental logical truth. Understanding this foundational layer compels logicians to not only master the rules of deduction but also to critically examine the premises from which they begin, recognizing that the truth derived from a logical system is always contingent upon the acceptance of its initial assumptions. This critical awareness is paramount for truly discerning reasoning, as it prompts us to question not just the steps of an argument, but its very starting points. Case Study 1, The AI's Ethical Dilemma. Scenario: a company develops an AI for self-driving cars. Its core logical system is built on the postulate that minimizing immediate harm to the vehicle's occupants is the absolute highest priority. In a no-win scenario, the AI consistently chooses to sacrifice pedestrians to save the car's occupants, a perfectly logical outcome given its foundational assumption. Challenge: students must identify this explicit postulate and discuss how altering it, e.g. to minimize overall harm, prioritize vulnerable road users, would lead to a different, yet still internally logical, set of decisions, fundamentally changing the AI's ethics. Focus: the impact of initial ethical postulates on a system's derived truths and actions. Case Study 2, the parallel postulate in geometry. Scenario: students are reminded of Euclidean geometry, where the parallel postulate states that through a point not on a given line, exactly one line parallel to the given line can be drawn. They are then briefly introduced to the idea of non-Euclidean geometries, e.g. hyperbolic geometry where infinite parallels exist, or elliptic geometry where no parallels exist. Challenge: students must explain how merely changing this single postulate at the foundation of geometry leads to entirely different, yet internally consistent and logical, geometric systems. Focus: how altering a fundamental mathematical postulate creates distinct, self-consistent logical frameworks. Case Study 3, the scientific paradigm shift. Scenario: historically, scientific reasoning often operated under the postulate that all observable phenomena are due to a single, discoverable cause, determinism. This led to logical deductions about the universe's predictable nature. The rise of quantum mechanics, however, introduced the postulate of inherent uncertainty at subatomic levels. Challenge: students should discuss how these differing foundational assumptions, determinism versus inherent uncertainty, logically lead to vastly different conclusions about causality and predictability within the universe, despite both being rigorous scientific frameworks. Focus: how changing foundational scientific assumptions fundamentally alters the logical inferences and truths derived from empirical observation. The advanced understanding of the foundations of logic deeply hinges on the role of assumptions and postulates, which are often used interchangeably with axioms. These aren't just arbitrary starting points, but rather form the bedrock upon which entire logical and mathematical systems are constructed. Think of them as the initial, unproven statements that are accepted as true within a specific framework, allowing for the derivation of all other truths within that system. Historically, in fields like Euclidean geometry, postulates were seen as self-evident truths. You didn't need to prove that a straight line can be drawn between any 2 points, it was simply accepted as a fundamental property of space. This intuition-driven acceptance formed the base. However, as logic progressed, particularly in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the perspective shifted. Mathematicians and logicians realized that these foundational assumptions didn't necessarily have to be self-evident. Instead, they could be chosen deliberately, much like rules in a game. This shift gave rise to formal axiomatic systems, where the focus moved from the truth of the axioms in an intuitive sense, to their consistency and completeness. Consistency means that you can't derive a contradiction within the system from your chosen axioms, you can't prove both a statement and its negation. If a system is inconsistent, it collapses, as anything can be proven. Completeness, on the other hand, means that every true statement within the system can theoretically be proven from the axioms. Kurt Gödel's incompleteness theorems famously demonstrated that for any sufficiently powerful consistent axiomatic system like arithmetic, there will always be true statements that cannot be proven within that system, revealing a fundamental limitation on the power of formal systems. The choice of these initial assumptions profoundly shapes the entire logical landscape. For example, in geometry, If you replace Euclid's parallel postulate that through a point not on a given line, exactly one parallel line can be drawn with alternative postulates, you don't break geometry, you simply create different, non-Euclidean geometries, like hyperbolic or elliptic geometry, which are internally consistent and mathematically valid. This illustrates that logical systems are not necessarily descriptions of a single, objective reality, but rather abstract frameworks built on a set of chosen rules. Furthermore, within these advanced theories, the distinction between logical axioms and non-logical axioms becomes relevant. Logical axioms are fundamental truths of logic itself, like A implies A, while non-logical axioms are specific to the domain being modeled, like the axioms of set theory defining what a set is. The power and scope of a logical system are thus determined by both the inherent rules of inference and the specific assumptions introduced as its starting points. This foundational understanding allows logicians and mathematicians to construct rigorous, well-defined systems for reasoning, even if those systems explore abstract worlds not immediately tied to empirical observation. Case Study 1, Euclidean versus non-Euclidean geometries. Assumptions. Postulates. Euclid's 5 postulates, notably the parallel postulate through a point not on a given line, exactly one parallel line can be drawn. System. A Euclidean, accepts all 5. Leads to familiar geometry, e.g. sum of angles in a triangle is 180 degrees. System. B. Hyperbolic, replaces the parallel postulate with, through a point not on a given line, at least 2 parallel lines can be drawn. Leads to a consistent, but counterintuitive geometry, e.g. sum of angles in a triangle is less than 180 degrees. System. C. Elliptic, replaces the parallel postulate with, through a point not on a given line, no parallel lines can be drawn. Leads to another consistent geometry, e.g. sum of angles in a triangle is greater than 180 degrees. Insight: changing a single foundational postulate fundamentally alters the entire logical system, demonstrating that logical truths are relative to the chosen axioms. Case Study 2, Russell's Paradox and Axiomatic Set Theory (ZFC). Initial assumption. Naive set theory: any definable collection of objects forms a set, e.g. the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. Consequence. Russell's paradox: this seemingly intuitive assumption leads to a contradiction. If such a set exists, does it contain itself or not? Both answers lead to a paradox. This demonstrated the inconsistency of the initial assumption. Revised assumptions. ZFC axioms. Mathematicians developed Zermelo-Fraenkel set theory with the axiom of choice ZFC, a set of carefully chosen postulates that restrict how sets can be formed, e.g. the axiom of separation, which states that a subset can only be formed from an existing set by a specific property. Insight: when an initial assumption leads to contradiction, new, more restrictive, and well-defined axioms must be introduced to restore consistency and build a robust logical system, even if they are less intuitive. Case Study 3, Peano axioms for natural numbers. Assumptions. Postulates: a set of 5 axioms defining natural numbers, starting with 0 is a natural number and including the concept of a unique successor for each natural number. System: from these few, seemingly simple axioms, all properties of addition, multiplication, and other arithmetic operations on natural numbers can be rigorously derived. Insight: a small, carefully selected set of foundational postulates can underpin an entire complex mathematical domain, demonstrating how basic assumptions propagate into vast logical consequences. The consistency and completeness of these axioms are crucial for the integrity of arithmetic. While often perceived as interchangeable, a more advanced understanding of reasoning reveals a critical distinction between formal logical validity and real-world rational decision-making. Logic, in its purest and most formal sense, is primarily concerned with the structure of arguments. It provides the rules and methods to determine whether a conclusion necessarily follows from its premises. If an argument is logically valid, it means that if the premises are true, the conclusion must also be true, irrespective of whether the premises themselves are factually accurate or plausible in the real world. For example, the argument "all cats are purple, Felix is a cat, therefore, Felix is purple" is logically valid, even though its first premise is factually absurd. The validity here stems solely from the correct deductive form. Rationality, on the other hand, is a much broader concept that encompasses the application of reasoning skills, including logic, to achieve goals, make sound judgments, and form justifiable beliefs in the complex, messy context of the real world. A rational decision is not merely one that is logically consistent, but one that is also informed by available evidence, sensitive to context, considers ethical implications, accounts for personal values, and is aware of potential cognitive biases. The individual who only acts according to formally valid arguments, without considering the truth of their premises or the broader consequences, might be logically sound but profoundly irrational. For example, a business decision that is logically valid based on flawed or incomplete market data would not be considered rational, despite its internal logical consistency. Similarly, a person adhering strictly to a set of logically consistent but utterly unrealistic postulates might be operating logically within their own framework, but their actions would be far from rational in a practical sense, as Asimov's quote implies. Therefore, logic serves as an indispensable tool for rationality, providing the framework for coherent thought, but rationality extends beyond mere formal correctness to encompass the wisdom of selecting appropriate premises, evaluating the real-world implications of conclusions, and continually adjusting one's reasoning in light of new information and evolving circumstances. It's about reasoning effectively in the face of uncertainty and incomplete information, not just reasoning correctly from given starting points. Case Study 1, The Perfect Business Plan. Scenario: a startup presents a business plan with impeccable internal logic. If we acquire X users, then we will achieve Y revenue. We have a strategy to acquire X users. Therefore, we will achieve Y revenue. The plan is logically valid. However, the premise "we have a strategy to acquire X users" is based on an unverified assumption about market response and a single, outdated piece of research. The company launches, fails to acquire X users, and collapses. Challenge: students must explain why the plan was logically valid but ultimately irrational as a business decision. Focus: the critical importance of truthful, plausible premises and real-world evidence for rationality, even if the logical structure is sound. Case Study 2, The Conspiracy Theory. Scenario: a conspiracy theory argues, if the government wants to control information, then it will suppress dissenting voices. We see evidence of dissenting voices being suppressed. Therefore, the government wants to control information. This argument appears logically valid modus ponens. However, the evidence is selectively interpreted, alternative explanations for suppression, e.g. community guidelines, genuine misinformation are ignored, and a strong confirmation bias is present. Challenge: students must identify the argument's logical validity but explain why, despite this, believing the conclusion based on this reasoning is irrational due to flawed premises and cognitive biases. Focus: how biased premises and lack of comprehensive evidence undermine rationality, even in a valid argument structure. Case Study 3, The Doctor's Dilemma. Scenario: a doctor faces a patient with a rare, aggressive disease. A new, unproven drug exists. The argument for using it is, if this drug works, the patient will live. The patient will die without it. Therefore, we should try this drug. This might seem logically compelling in the face of despair. However, the premise if this drug works is highly uncertain, and there are known severe side effects. A rational decision would also weigh the low probability of success, the high risk of harm, and perhaps explore palliative care. Challenge: students should discuss how the argument taps into a strong emotional pull, appearing logical, but why a rational medical decision would require considering probabilities, risks, and alternatives beyond a simple conditional argument. Focus: rationality encompassing probability, risk assessment, ethical considerations, and a broader context beyond simple logical entailment. The distinction between logic and rationality holds profound implications for the development and understanding of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Traditional AI, particularly symbolic AI, often focused on encoding knowledge and rules in a way that mimicked formal logic. These systems excelled at tasks where logical validity was paramount, such as theorem proving or expert systems operating within clearly defined parameters. They could flawlessly execute logical deductions based on their programmed premises. However, these systems often struggled with ambiguity, incomplete information, and the dynamic nature of the real world, frequently leading to brittle behavior when confronted with situations outside their perfectly logical frameworks. Modern machine learning, especially approaches like deep learning, moves closer to modeling aspects of rationality. While not explicitly programmed with logical rules, these systems learn patterns and make predictions or decisions based on vast amounts of data. Their rationality emerges from their ability to identify complex relationships, adapt to new inputs, and often achieve goals in uncertain environments. For instance, a self-driving car doesn't operate on a fixed set of if-then logical rules for every conceivable road scenario. Instead, it uses learned patterns to make rational decisions about speed, steering, and braking in real time, even in novel situations. This involves probabilistic reasoning, risk assessment, and continuous learning, hallmarks of real-world rationality. The challenge for AI now lies in integrating the strengths of formal logic for consistency and explainability with the adaptive, probabilistic, and evidence-driven nature of rationality to create truly intelligent and reliable systems that can navigate both the abstract world of inference and the complex realities of our environment. Case Study 1, Algorithmic Trading Bot. Imagine an algorithmic trading bot designed with a highly logical rule set. If stock A drops by 5% and stock B rises by 2%, then execute trade X. This bot is logically valid within its parameters. However, in a volatile market where unforeseen geopolitical events suddenly cause widespread panic selling, its rigidly logical rules might lead to catastrophic losses because its premises based on typical market movements no longer hold true. A truly rational trading bot would incorporate real-time news analysis, sentiment indicators, and adaptive learning algorithms to adjust its premises and trading strategies in response to unprecedented, non-logical market shifts, even if that adjustment defies its initial, purely logical rules. Case Study 2, Medical Diagnosis AI. Consider an AI system developed for medical diagnosis. An earlier version might rely purely on logical rules. If symptoms A, B, and C are present, then diagnose disease X. This is logically valid given its programmed knowledge. However, a patient might present with atypical symptoms, comorbidities, or rare conditions that don't fit the rigid logical framework. A more rational diagnostic AI would leverage probabilistic reasoning, machine learning from vast patient data sets, and incorporate confidence scores, suggesting possibilities and weighing the likelihood of various conditions based on subtle patterns and incomplete information, much like an experienced human doctor would in a complex case. It moves beyond simple logical entailment to a probabilistic, Evidence-driven assessment. Case Study 3, Autonomous Vehicle Navigation. Think about an autonomous vehicle navigating city streets. A purely logical system might operate on rules like, if traffic light is red, then stop. While essential, this is insufficient for rational navigation. A rational autonomous system would integrate multiple, often conflicting, inputs: the state of the traffic light, the behavior of other unpredictable human drivers, pedestrians suddenly appearing, weather conditions, road surface friction, and its own internal state, e.g. battery level, tire pressure. Its decision to stop, proceed, or swerve is not just a logical deduction but a real-time, probabilistic assessment of risk and optimal path finding in a highly uncertain and dynamic environment. It makes the most rational choice given its goals: safety, efficiency, and the complex, messy information it receives, rather than just following rigid logical commands. The ongoing exploration of logic versus rationality ultimately circles back to the human experience. While formal logic provides us with a powerful framework for structured thought and impeccable deduction within defined systems, human rationality is a far more intricate and often less predictable phenomenon. Unlike a computer, humans operate not just with data and rules, but with emotions, values, intuition, and a history of lived experiences. These subjective elements profoundly influence how we interpret premises, weigh evidence, and ultimately make decisions. A human might make a choice that seems illogical on paper, e.g. pursuing a passion project with low financial returns, but is entirely rational from the perspective of their personal well-being or fulfillment. This introduces a complexity that purely formal logic struggles to capture. Furthermore, human rationality is often bounded. We operate with cognitive limitations, including finite attention spans, memory constraints, and susceptibility to a myriad of biases like confirmation bias or availability heuristic. These limitations mean that even when striving for rationality, our real-world decision-making often relies on mental shortcuts and heuristics rather than exhaustive logical processing. The rational human understands these limitations and employs strategies to mitigate them, such as seeking diverse perspectives, actively questioning assumptions, and engaging in reflective thinking. The goal isn't to be a perfect logical machine, but to be a reasonably effective and adaptable agent in a complex world, balancing logical consistency with the demands of practical action and personal values. Understanding this interplay is key to both improving our own decision-making and designing AI that can truly augment human intelligence rather than simply mimic one facet of it. Case Study 1, The Entrepreneur's Risky Pivot. Consider an entrepreneur whose data logically suggests continuing with their current product line, which generates steady, albeit modest, revenue. The logical conclusion, based on market analysis and financial projections, is to stick with the tried and true. However, the entrepreneur has a strong gut feeling intuition that the market is about to shift dramatically, and they feel a deep passion for an entirely new, unproven idea that addresses a perceived future need. Despite the logical data pointing otherwise, they decide to pivot the entire company, investing heavily in the new, riskier venture. This decision might appear illogical on paper, but it could be deeply rational for that individual, driven by their vision, risk tolerance, and belief in their own ability to innovate, ultimately leading to significant success or failure. Case Study 2, Choosing a University Degree. Imagine a student choosing a university degree. A purely logical approach might lead them to select a field with the highest graduate employment rates and starting salaries, regardless of personal interest. The reasoning would be, if I want maximum financial security, I should choose this degree, because it statistically offers the best returns. However, a rational decision for that student would also incorporate their genuine interests, their learning style, the university's culture, and their long-term career aspirations, which might include job satisfaction over maximum income. They might choose a humanities degree over engineering, understanding the differing career paths but prioritizing personal fulfillment and intellectual engagement, making it a rational choice for them, even if less logical purely from a financial perspective. Case Study 3, the jury's deliberation. In a courtroom, a jury is presented with evidence. Individually, jurors might apply logical deductions from specific pieces of testimony. For instance, if witness X saw the defendant at the scene, then the defendant was at the scene. However, the jury's collective deliberation process is a complex act of human rationality. Jurors weigh the credibility of witnesses influenced by intuition and observed demeanor, not just logical statements, discuss ambiguities, consider the emotional impact of the crime, and reconcile conflicting accounts. They don't just add up logical proofs, they construct a coherent narrative, influenced by their collective human experience, biases, and values, to arrive at a rational verdict that reflects their shared understanding of justice, even if some individual pieces of evidence are logically insufficient on their own. Fuzzy logic is a logic whose distinguishing features are fuzzy truth values expressed in linguistic terms, e.g. true, very true, more or less true, or somewhat true, false, nor very true and not very false, etc. 2 imprecise truth tables, and 3 rules of inference whose validity is relative to a context rather than exact. Lotfi Azadeh 1975 Fuzzy Logic and Approximate Reasoning. Synthese 30, p. 407. Conclusion: the journey through an introductory logic course is a transformative exploration of the architecture of human thought, equipping students with the tools to dissect arguments, construct sound inferences, and navigate the intricate interplay between formal logic and real-world rationality. By delving into propositional and predicate logic, students master the mechanics of truth tables, logical connectives, quantifiers, and argument forms, honing their ability to evaluate reasoning with precision. Yet, the true depth of such a course lies not merely in mastering these technical skills but in uncovering the profound philosophical and practical insights that emerge from understanding logic's foundations, limitations, and its relationship to rationality. As Isaac Asimov's character in Reason observes, postulates are based on assumptions and adhered to by faith. Nothing in the universe can shake them. This insight serves as a guiding thread, revealing that even the most rigorous logical systems rest on unproven foundations, prompting a deeper reflection on the nature of truth, the fragility of certainty, and the dynamic interplay between abstract deduction and lived experience. At its core, logic is a disciplined study of correct reasoning, providing a framework to distinguish valid arguments from fallacious ones. From Aristotle's syllogistic logic, which formalized the structure of arguments like all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore, Socrates is mortal, to the Stoics' advancements in propositional logic, the historical evolution of logic underscores its role as a universal tool for structuring thought. However, the course reveals a critical insight: logical validity is not synonymous with truth. An argument may be impeccably valid, its conclusion necessarily following from its premises, yet rest on premises that are factually false or contextually irrelevant. For example, the logically valid argument all planets are made of cheese, Earth is a planet, therefore, Earth is made of cheese demonstrates that validity hinges solely on structure, not content. This realization pushes students to scrutinize not just the form of arguments but the plausibility and evidence behind their premises, a skill that transcends the classroom and applies to evaluating claims in science, policy, or everyday discourse. The distinction between logic and rationality emerges as a cornerstone insight, illuminating the broader landscape of human decision-making. Logic provides the scaffolding rules like modus ponens or universal instantiation that ensure consistency within a system. Rationality, however, is a more expansive endeavor, weaving together logic, empirical evidence, contextual awareness, and an acknowledgement of human limitations such as cognitive biases or incomplete information. Consider a courtroom scenario where a jury evaluates evidence. A purely logical approach might focus on isolated deductions, such as if the witness is credible, then their testimony is true. Yet, rational deliberation involves weighing witness credibility against conflicting accounts, emotional cues, and societal values, constructing a narrative that balances logical coherence with practical wisdom. This interplay highlights that rationality is not about achieving perfect logical certainty but about making defensible decisions in an uncertain world, a lesson vividly illustrated in case studies like the entrepreneur who pivots against logical data based on intuition or the AI system that prioritizes efficiency over ethical considerations due to its rigid postulates. The exploration of logic's foundations further deepens this understanding, revealing that all logical systems are built on axioms or postulates, assumptions accepted without proof within a given framework. In Euclidean geometry, the parallel postulate shapes a world where triangles' angles sum to 180 degrees, while non-Euclidean geometries, by altering this single assumption, yield entirely different yet consistent systems. Similarly, in modern set theory, the shift from naive assumptions to the Zermelo-Fraenkel axioms resolved paradoxes like Russell's, demonstrating that logical systems are not universal truths but constructed frameworks shaped by their starting points. Asimov's quote resonates here, suggesting that these postulates are chosen not by absolute proof but by their utility, consistency, or alignment with intuition. This insight compels students to question not only the conclusions of arguments but also the assumptions beneath them, fostering a critical awareness that is essential in fields from mathematics to ethics, where foundational shifts can redefine what is true. The course also bridges theory and practice through frameworks like Tolman's method and pragmadialectics, offering sophisticated tools for analyzing and resolving arguments. Tolman's model, with its emphasis on claims, grounds, warrants, qualifiers, and rebuttals, provides a nuanced lens for dissecting real-world arguments, whether in medical diagnoses or policy debates. For instance, claiming that electric cars are better for the environment requires grounds, e.g. lower emissions, a warrant, e.g. emissions reduction benefits the environment, and a rebuttal acknowledging battery production's environmental costs. Pragmadialectics, meanwhile, envisions argumentation as a cooperative process aimed at resolving disputes through reasoned exchange, as seen in idealized scenarios like a team resolving a project deadline conflict by testing evidence against shared standards. These frameworks underscore that effective argumentation is not about domination but about clarity and mutual understanding, a principle that resonates in democratic discourse, scientific collaboration, and interpersonal relationships. In the realm of artificial intelligence, the logic-rationality distinction offers profound insights into the evolution of intelligent systems. Early symbolic AI relied on explicit logical rules, excelling in constrained domains like theorem proving but faltering in ambiguous, real-world contexts. Modern machine learning, by contrast, approximates rationality by learning patterns from data, enabling systems like autonomous vehicles to navigate complex environments through probabilistic reasoning rather than rigid deduction. Yet, these systems remain bound by their postulates, whether encoded algorithms or biases in training data, highlighting the need to integrate logical consistency with adaptive, evidence-driven decision-making. A medical diagnosis AI, for example, must move beyond if-then rules to weigh probabilities and rare conditions, much like a human doctor balances logic with experience. This convergence of logic and rationality in AI underscores the importance of designing systems that not only compute validly but also reason wisely in unpredictable settings. Ultimately, the study of logic is a journey into the heart of human cognition, revealing both its power and its fragility. While logic offers a beacon of clarity, enabling us to construct rigorous arguments and uncover fallacies, it is rationality that anchors these tools in the lived world, where emotions, values, and uncertainty shape our choices. Human rationality is bounded, constrained by cognitive limits, biases, and the complexity of reality, yet it is also dynamic, capable of adapting through reflection and diverse perspectives. An introductory logic course does more than teach students to manipulate symbols or prove theorems. It cultivates a mindset that embraces critical scrutiny, questions foundational assumptions, and seeks to balance deductive precision with practical wisdom. By understanding that logical truths are contingent on chosen postulates, students learn to approach knowledge with humility, recognizing that reason is not a static endpoint but a continuous process of inquiry, adaptation, and growth. In this way, the course prepares them not only to argue well but to think deeply, navigate complexity, and engage with the world as reflective, rational agents in pursuit of a truth that is ever evolving. The moment we stop assuming that the ideas of any milieu form static propositional systems, and recognize that they constitute historically developing conceptual populations, we are free to abandon also the philosopher's traditional assumption that rationality is a subspecies of logicality. In non-intellectual contexts, we judge the rationality of a man's conduct, not by how he habitually behaves, but rather how far he modifies his behavior in new and unfamiliar situations, and it is arguable that the rationality of intellectual performances should be judged, correspondingly, by considering, not the internal consistency of a man's habitual concepts and beliefs, but rather the manner in which he modifies this intellectual position in the face of new and unforeseen experiences. Stephen Towlman, Human Understanding, 1972, Volume 1, The Collective Use and Evolution of Concepts. Below is a comprehensive final exam for the introductory logic course designed to assess students' mastery of fundamental concepts, their ability to apply logical principles, and their capacity to engage with the philosophical and practical implications of logic and rationality. The exam includes a mix of multiple choice, short answer, case study analyses, and essay questions to evaluate technical proficiency, analytical skills, and critical thinking. The structure reflects the course's focus on propositional and predicate logic, argument analysis, the role of assumptions, and the distinction between logic and rationality, while avoiding the use of symbolic equations to align with your request. Introductory Logic Course Final Exam. Course Title: Introduction to Logic and Rationality. Instructor: your name. Duration: 3 hours. Instructions: answer all questions in the provided answer booklet. Show all reasoning clearly to receive full credit, especially for short answer and case study questions. For essay and case study questions, emphasize clarity, logical structure, and engagement with course concepts. Calculators and electronic devices are not permitted. A reference sheet with key logical terms is provided. Total points: 100. Section 1, Propositional Logic, 20 points. 1 Multiple choice, 5 points. Choose the correct answer for each question. Each question is worth 1 point. Which of the following is always true regardless of the truth of its components? A statement and its negation combined. B, a statement or its negation combined. C, if one statement implies another. D, two statements being equivalent. B, the if and only if relationship between two statements is true when A, both statements have the same truth value. B, the first statement is true and the second is false. C. The first statement is false and the second is true. D. Both statements are false. C. Which argument form is represented by, if P then Q, P is true, therefore Q is true. A. Denying the consequent. B. Affirming the antecedent. C. Disjunctive reasoning. D. Chaining implications. D. A contradiction is a statement that is, A. Always true, B. Always false, C. True under some conditions, D. Equivalent to another statement. E. How many possible combinations of truth values are there for a statement involving two propositions, e.g. P or Q? A. 2, B. 3, C. 4, D. 8. 2. Truth analysis. 5 points. Describe the truth conditions for the statement. If it is raining, then the ground is wet, and either the ground is not wet or it is cloudy. Determine whether the statement is always true, always false, or sometimes true, and explain your reasoning using a step-by-step analysis of the components. 3. Statement translation. 5 points. Translate the following English statements into precise logical descriptions, defining clear propositions. Define S as the server is online. Define B as the backup system is active. Define E as the error log is empty. A. The backup system is not active if the server is online. B. The error log is empty exactly when either the server is online or the backup system is active. 4. Argument evaluation. 5 points. Evaluate whether the following argument is valid. Premise 1, if the project is funded, then it will succeed. Premise 2, the project did not succeed. Conclusion, the project was not funded. Explain your reasoning by analyzing the structure of the argument and whether the conclusion must follow from the premises. Section 2, Predicate Logic. 20 points. 5. Statement translation. 6 points. Translate the following English statements into precise predicate logic descriptions, using the provided predicates and domain. Domain, all students in a university. C means is taking a calculus course. P means is a philosophy major. F means is friends with a relationship between two students. A. Some students are both taking a calculus course and majoring in philosophy. B. Every philosophy major is friends with at least one student who is not taking a calculus course. C. There is a student who is friends with every philosophy major. 6. Formal reasoning. 8 points. Construct a step-by-step argument to show that the following reasoning is valid, using standard rules of inference, e.g. applying a general rule to a specific case, combining premises to reach a conclusion. Premise 1, every student who studies hard passes the exam. Premise 2, there is at least one student who studies hard. Conclusion, there is at least one student who passes the exam. List each step and briefly describe the reasoning rule used, e.g. applying a general rule, concluding existence. 7. Counterexample construction. 6 points. Show that the following argument is invalid by creating a specific scenario, a model with a defined domain and properties. Premise 1, every bird can fly. Premise 2, there is at least one bird. Conclusion, every animal can fly. Explain why your scenario demonstrates that the conclusion does not necessarily follow from the premises. Section 3, Argument Analysis. 20 points. 8. Tallman-S method. 8 points. Analyze the following argument using Tallman-S method, identifying the claim, grounds, warrant, qualifier, rebuttal, and backing. Adopting a 4-day workweek will improve employee productivity. Research shows that employees in companies with shorter workweeks report higher job satisfaction and less burnout. Higher satisfaction and lower burnout generally lead to better performance. However, this may not hold in industries with rigid deadlines, like healthcare. 9. Pragmadialectics. 6 points. In a team meeting, a manager argues, we must adopt this new software to stay competitive, while a developer counters, the software is too unstable for production use. Describe how this dispute could be resolved using the pragmadialectical approach, outlining the stages: opening, argumentation, testing, concluding. Identify one potential violation of the rules for fair discussion, e.g. shutting down debate, and suggest how to prevent it. 10. Validity versus rationality. 6 points. Consider the argument: if the stock market crashes, then we should invest all our money in gold. The stock market has crashed. Therefore, we should invest all our money in gold. Is this argument logically valid? Explain why or why not, focusing on its structure. B. Why might following this argument lead to an irrational decision, despite its logical structure? Discuss in terms of the premises and real-world considerations like evidence or consequences. Section 4, Foundations of Logic and Case Studies. 20 points. 11. Role of postulates. 8 points. Referencing Asimov's quote, postulates are based on assumptions and adhered to by faith. Nothing in the universe can shake them. Explain how the choice of foundational assumptions shapes logical systems. Use the example of classical geometry versus alternative geometries, e.g. where parallel lines behave differently, to illustrate your answer. Discuss what this means for evaluating truth in logical reasoning. 12. Case study, the automated aid dilemma. 12 points. Scenario: an AI system routes humanitarian aid based on the assumption that efficiency is the top priority, leading it to prioritize speed over need, so less urgent areas receive aid first. Describe the AI's decision rule in clear logical terms, defining key terms, e.g. efficient route, prioritized area. B. Explain why the AI's decisions are logically consistent within its system but potentially irrational in a real-world context. C. Propose a different assumption, e.g. prioritize areas with greatest need, and describe how it would alter the AI's decisions, expressing the new rule in logical terms. D. Discuss how this case highlights the limitations of logic without rationality, drawing on coarse concepts like assumptions and real-world evidence. Section 5, Essay. 20 points. 13. Essay, Logic versus Rationality. 20 points. Write a well-structured essay, approximately 500 to 600 words, addressing the following question: how does the distinction between logical consistency and real-world rationality shape our understanding of effective decision-making? Use at least 2 case studies from the course, e.g., the entrepreneur's risky pivot, the doctor's dilemma, or others, to illustrate your argument. Discuss the role of assumptions, evidence, and context in bridging logic and rationality, and explain why rationality requires more than just logical consistency. Guidelines: start with a clear thesis statement. Use specific course examples to support your argument. Address both the philosophical and practical implications of the logic-rationality distinction. Conclude with a reflection on how this distinction enhances critical thinking in real-world scenarios. Grading rubric, Section 1. 20 points. Accuracy in analyzing propositional logic, translations, and argument evaluations. Section 2. 20 points. Precision in predicate logic translations, reasoning steps, and counterexample clarity. Section 3. 20 points. Depth in applying J.O.L.A.L.F's method, pragmadialectics, and logic-rationality analysis. Section 4. 20 points. Insightful engagement with postulates and case study analysis, with clear logical descriptions. Section 5. 20 points. Coherence, depth, and use of course concepts in the essay, with strong examples and philosophical reflection. Total, 100 points. Note: clearly label all answers with question numbers. Partial credit will be awarded for incomplete but correct reasoning. Good luck. Appendix A, enhancing logical mastery resources, tools, and extended learning. 1 Glossary of key terms. Propositional logic, the study of how simple statements combine using connectors like and, or, and if then to form valid arguments. Predicate logic, analyzes statements involving relationships and quantities, such as all or some, to express more complex ideas. Tautology, a statement that is always true by its logical structure, e.g., it is raining or it is not raining. Syllogism, a classic argument structure with two premises leading to a conclusion, e.g., all humans are mortal, Socrates is human, therefore, Socrates is mortal. Fallacy, a common error in reasoning, such as attacking a person instead of their argument ad hominem. Validity, an argument is valid if its conclusion logically follows from its premises, regardless of whether the premises are true. Soundness, a valid argument with true premises, ensuring the conclusion is both logical and factual. Non-Euclidean geometry, a geometric system that reimagines traditional rules, such as how parallel lines behave. 2 Additional practice problems. Propositional logic, translate into logical terms, the match continues only if the rain stops. Analyze the conditions under which the statement "if the server is online, then the error log is empty" holds true. Predicate logic, symbolize, every cube is smaller than at least one tetrahedron. 3 Further reading list. Introductory, logic, a very short introduction by Graham Priest explores paradoxes and real-world applications. The Tools of Argument by J.O.L.F, Practical Guide to Structuring Debates. Advanced, Gödel, Escher, Bach by Douglas Hofstadter interweaves logic, art, and artificial intelligence. Online resources, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entries on logic and rationality. 4 Logic tools and software. Truth table generators, online tools to visualize how compound statements behave under different conditions. Proof assistance, software for constructing and verifying logical arguments step by step. Educational games, puzzle games that train pattern recognition and deductive reasoning. 5 Case Study Expansion Guide. Automated Aid Dilemma, Step 1, identify the AIS core rule, prioritize speed over urgency. Step 2, critique the rule using real-world data, e.g. regions in crisis might need slower but more targeted aid. Discussion, how might the AI incorporate qualitative factors like human suffering into its decision-making? 6. Historical context timeline. Ancient Greece, Aristotle establishes syllogistic logic, defining rules for valid arguments. 19th century, George Boole and others formalize logic into algebraic systems. 20th century, Kurt Gödel demonstrates inherent limits in logical systems. 7 Philosophical debates. The liar paradox, how do we handle statements like "this sentence is false," which undermine traditional notions of truth? Intuitionism versus formalism, should logic reflect human thought processes or exist as an abstract system of rules? 8. Sample solutions. Final exam truth analysis example, statement, if it is raining, the ground is wet, and either the ground isn't wet or it's cloudy. Analysis, if it's raining, the ground must be wet. If the ground isn't wet, then it must be cloudy. The statement holds true in scenarios where rain implies wet ground, or cloudiness compensates for dry conditions. 9 Interactive learning activities. Role-playing, debate ethical dilemmas as an AI ethicist prioritizing fairness vs. efficiency engineer maximizing speed. Simulation, test decision-making in scenarios where logical rules clash with real-world complexity, e.g. self-driving car ethics. 10 Self-assessment checklists. Predicate logic mastery, translate statements like every student admires a teacher into precise logical terms. Identify hidden assumptions in quantified arguments. Critical thinking, deconstruct political speeches using Thalmann's method. Claim, evidence, warrants. Recognize common fallacies in social media debates. Purpose, this appendix supports learners in moving beyond abstract theory to apply logic in practical, interdisciplinary contexts. By avoiding symbolic notation, it emphasizes conceptual clarity, historical context, and real-world relevance, fostering a deeper appreciation for logic as a tool for rational inquiry and ethical decision-making. Appendix B, Informal Logic in Practice, analyzing real-world arguments. Informal logic focuses on evaluating everyday reasoning, identifying fallacies, and improving critical thinking in contexts where formal symbolic systems are impractical. This appendix equips learners with tools to dissect arguments in politics, media, ethics, and daily life, emphasizing clarity, relevance, and cogency. 1 Key concepts in informal logic. Premise, a statement offered as evidence or support for a conclusion. Conclusion, the claim an argument aims to prove. Argument structure, identifying hidden premises, assumptions, and the flow of reasoning. Context sensitivity, how meaning shifts based on cultural, situational, or linguistic factors. Burden of proof, the responsibility to provide evidence for a claim. 2 Common informal fallacies. Learn to spot flawed reasoning in real-world debates. 1 Ad hominem, attacking the person instead of their argument. Example, we shouldn't trust her climate policy, she owns an electric car. 2 Straw man, misrepresenting an opponent's position to make it easier to attack. Example, my opponent wants to ban cars. What they really mean is nobody should travel. 3 Appeal to emotion, using feelings, fear, pity to sway opinion without evidence. Example, if we don't pass this law, innocent children will suffer. 4 False dilemma, presenting only 2 options when more exist. Example, either we cut education funding or go bankrupt, there's no other choice. 5 Slippery slope, arguing that a small step will inevitably lead to extreme consequences. Example, legalizing scooters will cause traffic chaos and destroy our city. 3 Analytical frameworks. Thalmann's model in action. Apply this 6-part framework to dissect arguments. 1 Claim, social media harms mental health. 2 Grounds, studies show increased anxiety among teens who use Instagram. 3 Warrant, correlation between social media use and anxiety implies causation. 4 Backing, neuroscientific research on dopamine and comparison cycles. 5 Qualifier, this effect is often observed but not universal. 6 Rebuttal, some studies suggest social media fosters community for marginalized groups. The R model. Assertion, reasoning, evidence. Assertion, remote work improves productivity. Reasoning, fewer office distractions allow focused work. Evidence, a 2023 Stanford study found a 13% productivity boost in remote teams. 4 Case studies in informal logic. Case study 1, the vaccine debate. Argument, vaccines cause autism. Analysis, fallacy, correlation is not equal to causation. Post hoc fallacy. Hidden premise, a temporal link, vaccine followed by diagnosis proves causation. Counter evidence, large-scale studies showing no causal relationship. Case study 2, political speech analysis. Excerpt, my opponent supports tax cuts for the wealthy. That means they don't care about working families. Breakdown, straw man, misrepresents tax policy as binary pro-wealthy versus pro-poor. False dilemma, ignores nuanced positions e.g. tax cuts with social safeguards. Case study 3, corporate sustainability claims. Claim, our product is 100% eco-friendly. Scrutiny, ambiguity, eco-friendly undefined packaging sourcing carbon footprint. Omitted evidence, no data on supply chain practices or third-party certifications. 5 tools for everyday critical thinking. Argument mapping, visually diagram premises, conclusions, and relationships. Tool, use free platforms like MindMap https www.mindmup.com or paper diagrams. Pro-con analysis, weigh evidence for against a claim systematically. Socratic questioning, ask probing questions to uncover assumptions. What evidence supports this? Are there alternative explanations? What would change your mind? 6 further learning resources. Books, Attacking Faulty Reasoning by T. Edward Dahmer, Guide to Fallacies. Thank You for Arguing by J. Heinrichs, Rhetoric in Practice. Podcasts, You're Wrong About Debunks Myths Using Evidence. The Critical Thinking Initiative analyzes media and politics. Courses, Coursera's Logical and Critical Thinking, University of Auckland. edX's Rhetoric, The Art of Persuasive Writing and Public Speaking, Harvard. 7 self-assessment exercises. 1 fallacy hunt, analyze a news opinion piece. Identify 3 fallacies and rewrite the arguments without them. 2 argument reconstruction, take a social media post and restructure it using Thalmann's model. 3 debate simulation, role-play opposing sides of a contentious issue, e.g. AI regulation, focusing on logic over emotion. Purpose. This appendix bridges classroom logic with real-world discourse, empowering learners to navigate misinformation, strengthen their own arguments, and engage thoughtfully in public and private debates. By emphasizing practical application over abstraction, it fosters a habit of mind that questions assumptions, demands evidence, and resists manipulation. Appendix C, Advanced Applications of Logic in Interdisciplinary Contexts. This appendix bridges the foundational concepts of the Introductory Logic course with their advanced applications in professional and intellectual fields. By exploring how logic underpins disciplines like computer science, ethics, law, and artificial intelligence (AI), students will see its relevance beyond the classroom. The appendix emphasizes the critical role of assumptions, echoing Asimov's quote, "Postulates are based on assumptions and adhered to by faith. The distinction between logical validity and rational decision-making, and the need to adapt logical frameworks to complex, real-world scenarios." It provides case studies, tools, and reflection prompts to prepare students for applying logic in interdisciplinary settings. 1. Logic in computer science. Overview: logic is the backbone of computer science, governing everything from algorithm design to database queries and software verification. Propositional and predicate logic provide the structure for programming constructs, e.g. if-then-else statements and database searches, while formal proofs ensure software reliability. Application example: Boolean logic in programming, conditional statements in code, e.g. if user is logged in, then grant access, rely on propositional logic's truth functional relationships. For instance, a login system uses logical and both username and password must be correct and or allow access via email or phone verification. Predicate logic in databases, queries like find all customers who purchased items over 100 and live in California use predicates to define relationships and quantifiers to specify scope, e.g. all customers or some orders. Formal verification, Software engineers use logical proofs to verify that a program meets its specifications, ensuring no bugs cause critical failures, e.g. in aerospace or medical devices. Case study: the faulty algorithm. Scenario: a recommendation algorithm assumes, if a user likes action movies, they will enjoy sci-fi movies. This leads to poor recommendations because the assumption oversimplifies user preferences. Task: identify the logical structure of the algorithm's rule conditional statement. Discuss how its reliance on an untested postulate limits its rationality. Propose a revised rule, e.g. if a user likes action movies and has viewed sci-fi, then recommend sci-fi that incorporates more evidence. Insight: logical rules in algorithms must be grounded in robust, data-driven premises to ensure rational outcomes, highlighting the course's logic rationality distinction. Tool: flowchart analysis. Map out a program's decision tree to visualize logical conditions, e.g. if-then paths. Use tools like Lucidchart to diagram and critique the logic behind algorithms. Reflection prompt: how does a programmer balance logical consistency in code with rational adaptability to user behavior? Consider Asimov's idea of postulates as adhered to by faith. 2. Logic in ethical reasoning. Overview: ethics relies on logic to structure arguments about right and wrong, but rational ethical decisions require evaluating assumptions and consequences. Logical frameworks like J.O.L.F method help clarify ethical claims, while questioning postulates ensures robust moral reasoning. Application example: moral arguments. Ethical debates often take the form of syllogisms, such as all actions causing harm are wrong, lying causes harm, therefore, lying is wrong. Logic helps identify whether the conclusion follows, but rationality demands examining the premise lying causes harm in context, e.g. white lies to spare feelings. Policy analysis. In bioethics, logic underpins arguments like if a treatment saves lives but violates autonomy, it is permissible only if consent is given. Rationality weighs competing values: life versus autonomy and evidence treatment efficacy. Case study: the trolley problem. Scenario: a runaway trolley will kill 5 people unless you pull a lever to divert it, killing 1 person instead. An argument claims, if pulling the lever minimizes harm, you should pull it. Pulling the lever minimizes harm. Therefore, you should pull it. Task: use J.O.L.F method to analyze this argument claim, grounds, warrant, etc. Discuss why the logical validity of minimize harm may not lead to a rational ethical decision, e.g. ignoring emotional weight or moral principles like do no harm. Propose an alternative postulate, e.g. respect individual rights over collective harm and its impact. Insight: ethical reasoning requires logic to structure arguments but rationality to weigh values and assumptions, reinforcing Asimov's point about the foundational role of postulates. Tool: ethical decision matrix. Lists stakeholders, values, e.g. autonomy, justice, and logical arguments for against a decision. Rank options based on evidence and ethical priorities. Reflection prompt: how do unexamined ethical postulates, e.g. always minimize harm, limit rational decision-making? How can logic help uncover these assumptions? 3. Logic in legal reasoning. Overview: law relies on logic to interpret statutes, construct arguments, and evaluate evidence. Predicate logic clarifies complex legal conditions, while informal logic helps identify fallacies in courtroom arguments. Rationality ensures legal decisions align with justice and societal values. Application example: statutory interpretation. A law stating all vehicles must stop at red lights uses universal quantification. Lawyers use predicate logic to clarify ambiguities, e.g. does vehicle include bicycles? Argumentation: defense attorneys construct arguments like if the evidence is unreliable, the defendant is not guilty, the evidence is unreliable, therefore, the defendant is not guilty. Logic tests validity, but rationality evaluates evidence quality. Precedent analysis: judges use logical analogy to apply past rulings to new cases, ensuring consistency. Case study: the ambiguous contract. Scenario: a contract states, payment is due if and only if services are completed by June 1st. One party argues, services were partially completed, so payment is not due. Task: translate the contract into a logical statement using if and only if. Assess the argument's validity by checking if partial completion satisfies the condition. Discuss why a rational legal decision might consider intent, industry norms, or fairness beyond a logical structure. Insight: legal logic ensures clarity, but rational judgments incorporate context and equity, highlighting the course's emphasis on questioning foundational assumptions. Tool: legal argument checklist. Verify clarity of terms, logical structure, evidence strength, and alignment with precedent. Used to draft or critique legal arguments. Reflection prompt: how do rigid logical interpretations of laws, e.g. strict postulates, risk irrational outcomes in court? How can lawyers balance logic with fairness? 4. Logic in artificial intelligence. Overview: AI systems rely on logic for reasoning and decision-making, but modern AI increasingly approximates rationality through probabilistic models and machine learning. The course's logic-rationality distinction is critical for understanding AI's strengths and limitations. Application example: rule-based AI. Early AI used logical rules, e.g. if patient has fever and cough, diagnose flu. These are valid but brittle if assumptions fail. Machine learning. Modern AI uses data-driven models to make rational predictions, like diagnosing diseases based on symptom patterns, but biases in training data act as postulates that can skew outcomes. Explainability. Logical proofs help verify AI decisions, ensuring transparency in critical applications like medical diagnostics. Case study: the biased hiring AI. Scenario: an AI hiring tool assumes, if a candidate's resume matches top employees, they are a good hire. It rejects diverse candidates because historical data favors a specific demographic. Task: describe the AI's logical rule conditional statement. Explain why it is logically consistent but irrational due to biased postulates. Propose a revised rule, e.g. include diversity metrics in candidate evaluation and discuss its impact on fairness. Insight: AI's reliance on postulates mirrors Asimov's quote, showing that logical systems must be scrutinized for rational, ethical outcomes. Tool: bias audit framework. Evaluate AI inputs, outputs, and assumptions for logical consistency and fairness. Use checklists to identify biased postulates, e.g. skewed training data. Reflection prompt: how can logic help detect biases in AI? Why is rationality essential for ethical AI design? 5. Interdisciplinary synthesis exercise. Task: the policy proposal. Scenario: you are a consultant tasked with advising a city on implementing an AI-driven traffic management system. The AI assumes, optimizing traffic flow minimizes accidents. Stakeholders raise concerns about pedestrian safety and equity, e.g. prioritizing wealthy areas. Activity: translate the AI's assumption into a logical statement. Use Thalmann's method to construct an argument for or against the system, identifying grounds, warrant, and rebuttals. Apply pragmadialectics to outline a discussion process resolving stakeholder concerns, e.g. opening, testing stages. Propose a revised assumption balancing traffic flow, safety, and equity. Reflect on how logical validity system efficiency interacts with rational goals: fairness, safety. Purpose: synthesize course concepts, logic, rationality, postulates across computer science, ethics, and policy, demonstrating their real-world interplay. 6 Further learning resources. Books: Weapons of Math Destruction by Cathy O'Neill, 2016, explores biases in algorithmic logic and their societal impact. Logic and Legal Reasoning by Douglas Lynn, 2020, applies logic to statutory interpretation and case law. Ethics of Artificial Intelligence by S. Matthew Liao, 2020, examines logical and rational foundations of AI ethics. Online courses: Coursera SAI Ethics, University of Helsinki, Logic and Rationality in AI Design. edX's Logic for Computer Science, Stanford, Formal Logic in Programming and Verification. Tools: IBM SAI Fairness 360, Open Source Toolkit to Audit AI for Logical Consistency and Bias. Westlaw Edge, Legal Research Platform for Analyzing Logical Structure of Case Law. 7 Self-Assessment and Reflection. Exercises: Cross-disciplinary argument analysis. Pick a news article on AI, law, or ethics. Identify its logical structure and evaluate its rationality using course concepts. Postulate critique: select a real-world system, e.g. AI, policy, or legal rule. Identify its core assumption and discuss its impact on outcomes, referencing Asimov's quote. Debate simulation: argue for against an AI policy, e.g. autonomous vehicles, using logical structure and rational evidence, avoiding fallacies. Reflection questions: how do logical systems in your field of interest rely on unproven postulates? How can you use logic to challenge irrational decisions in professional settings? Why does rationality require questioning the faith in postulates, as Asimov suggests? Citations: Asimov's quote on postulates. Used in the course to highlight the role of assumptions in logical systems, from I, Robot, Asimov, 1950, p. 43. Coffee on the Utility of Logic. Cited for its discussion of logic's role in detecting fallacies and enhancing reasoning, Coffee, 1912, p. 38. Tolman on Rationality and Logic. Quoted to distinguish rationality from logicality in the context of conceptual evolution, Tolman, 1972, p. page not specified in quote. Zade on Fuzzy Logic. Referenced for its definition of fuzzy logic in relation to approximate reasoning, Zade, 1975, p. 407. Priest's Introductory Logic Text. Recommended in Appendix A for its accessible overview of logic, Priest, 2017. Trickman's Argumentation Guide. Suggested in Appendix A for practical argument analysis, Trickman, 2013. Hofstadter's Interdisciplinary Exploration. Listed in Appendix A for advanced study linking logic, AI, and creativity, Hofstadter, 1979. Copy's Logic Textbook, recommended in Appendix A as a classic resource for deeper study, Copy et al. 2016. Damer's Fallacy Guide. Suggested in Appendix B for its focus on informal fallacies, Damer, 2012. Heinrich's Rhetoric Guide. Recommended in Appendix B for practical argumentation and rhetoric, Heinrichs, 2020. References: Asimov, I. 1950. I, Robot. Gnome Press. Coffee, p. 1912. The Science of Logic. Longmans, Green, and Company. Copy, I. M. Cohen, C. and McMahon, K. 2016. Introduction to Logic, 14th ed. Routledge. Damer, T.E. 2012. Attacking Faulty Reasoning, A Practical Guide to Fallacy-Free Arguments 7th ed. Wadsworth's Engage Learning. Heinrichs, J. 2020. Thank you for arguing, what Aristotle, Lincoln, and Homer Simpson can teach us about the art of persuasion 4th ed. Three Rivers Press. Hofstadter, Dr. 1979. Gödel, Escher, Bach, An Eternal Golden Braid. Basic Books. Priest, G. 2017. Logic, A Very Short Introduction 2nd ed. Oxford University Press. Thalmann, S.E. 1972. Human Understanding, Volume 1. The Collective Use and Evolution of Concepts. Princeton University Press. Trickman, J.P. 2013. The Tools of Argument, How the Best Lawyers Think, Argue, and Win. Crete eSpace Independent Publishing Platform. J.O.L.A.L.F. 1975. Fuzzy Logic and Approximate Reasoning. Synthese, 33-4, 407-428. https, doi.org 10.1007 bf 00485052